You're building a 2016 presidential nominee out of Legos, sort of. What kind of policy modules should we include? Get down on the floor and give us a hand, will you? I'm PJTV's Scott Ott, joined now by Bill Whittle and Tammy Bruce, who has even more magnificent hair than the peripatetic Stephen Green. In part one of this tripartite trifecta, we stacked the Lego blocks of character, experience, attitude, and backstory. And in our members-only finale, we'll construct the battle space for campaign 2016. But right now, we're going to dig through the Rubbermaid tub and find the Lego pieces to build the policy platform for our ideal chief executive. I remind you, we have but one rule: no names of living politicians. Now, Tammy Bruce, as a world-famous radio host, I'm sure you hear from your listeners at TammyBruce.com over and over, it's the economy, stupid. So what are the building blocks of an economic policy for our new president?
Well, you know, part of course, the getting a good economy is having an American president who understands what makes the American people tick. But then there's also, of course, technical aspects. First thing is, of course, is lower taxes. This is not brain surgery. We've all seen what works and what fails. Lower taxes works. Fewer regulations works. Encouraging small business to build and grow, making it possible, making it valuable to start a new small business, being able to start that small business, figuring you've got some consistency in what you can expect that the government's going to do, consistency in tax policy, an attitude. Also, the economy is very much an attitude, and it's driven by the American people. If we have confidence in the future, then we're more likely to spend. If we don't know what's going to be happening, we retreat. So part of the president's job, and certain current dynamics have done the opposite of this, but part of the president's job is to not just pretend that the economy is good, but to actually be doing things that encourage it to be good. Now, also at the same time, it's not the government's job to, quote, create jobs. That's the American people's job. But if we're going to have an attitude that looks to the future, is confident in the future, we've got to have a president who's taking actions that indicate that he or she understands that the economy is in our hands, that the free marketplace is to be free, that the more regulations that exist, the less we can do. And then we begin to feel like we're in kind of a doll's house, that everything is controlled, it's being micromanaged. And then what are you going to do to start a small business if you don't know what the next month is going to bring, if you don't know what the economy is going to be? So it's about an attitude, but it's also about doing some very basic things that we've seen historically work. Lower taxes, reduce regulations. But as a Californian, I know that some regulations are necessary, but few of them. And an attitude and action when it comes to monetary policy, when it comes to confidence in the American people, and then also benefits, effectively a dynamic that not just when it comes to lowering taxes, but tax benefits to start those businesses out of the gate. And I think that then tells the American people that the government knows that a healthy economy is in those small business hands, which, by the way, are started mostly in this country by women and people of color, because we want actual, real economic freedom and personal freedom, and that's the way to get this nation started again.
Well, now, Bill, just down the internet, a couple of miles, I think, over in that direction, at BillWhittle.com, you play the virtual president of the United States. Mm-hmm. So what do our fellow Americans want when it comes to immigration policy in our next actual president of the United States?
Well, one of the first things I speak about in immigration is that to be somebody who wants to protect the border and stop illegal immigration is not to hate immigration, it's to love immigration. Because illegal immigration is spitting in the eye of the millions of people all around the world who wait in line, do the right things, fill out the forms, spend a fortune of their own money to come here legally just like everybody else did. It's a horrible affront to the people that have waited in line to do this. And the other point I try to make about illegal immigration is people come to America to flee either political corruption or tyranny or economic corruption or inactivity. Both of these things are the result of lawlessness. They want to come to America, which at least traditionally has been a land of the rule of law. If you bring lawlessness with you as your very first act, aren't you essentially bringing with you what you're trying to flee? So I think a sensible immigration policy has to understand that this country is not infinitely large and provide an infinite amount of resources. Interestingly enough, however, if it were not for the concomitant benefits that we provide to people, we could have as many immigrants as we want to. If we didn't have to pay for every one of them, they'd come and fill the jobs. Until there were no jobs, they'd go home. It wouldn't cost us anything. But our immigration problem is really out of control. So I think the solution to immigration is first of all, you have to secure the border. You just have to stop this constant, ongoing. It's not just immigrants, Scotty. It's undeclared warfare. We have narco groups with AK-47s making entire counties in the South unsafe for Americans to travel. And while the governor of Arizona is trying to fight this, the federal government puts up signs that says, "Do not travel in this area. It's unsafe for American citizens." So we have to get that border under control and understand that this is an infiltration on the part of drug gangs from Mexico. It's war. I'd call out the Army. I'd secure that border immediately. With that done, I would do two things. I would institute a guest worker program so that people who are in this country illegally can come into the light of the law and be held accountable to the law and be protected by the law. We have plenty of room for guest workers in this country, and as long as we understand who they are and what they are, that's great. They should be on a path to citizenship, but they should not get amnesty because that rewards their lawlessness. And I think the second thing we need to do is we need to dramatically, and I mean by a factor of 10 or 100, increase the number of the visas made available to highly skilled individuals who want to come to America and bring their money and their companies and their resources and settle here. I want to make those people citizens because these are the people that we've always attracted, the best and the brightest. You know, the Statue of Liberty famously says, "Give us your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." It didn't mean just the huddled masses, you know? I don't see how anybody who has been successful and worked hard and wants to come to America to either work or live is less of a person than somebody who hasn't.
Well, and historically, as you know, a lot of those folks were actually pretty well off until their country went to hell, and then they came here with pennies in their pocket and rebuilt their fortunes because of the opportunity that's made possible here.
Can I just add one thing? Just since it's so important. I know we're running long, but I grew up in Miami, and I saw that with the Cuban immigrants. I've seen this with my own eyes thousands of times. Brain surgeons, heart surgeons who came to America, didn't get their license, open a 7-Eleven or a convenience store, hand it off to their kids, open a second one and a third one, and 10 or 15 years later, they're millionaires and their kids are heart surgeons.
Well, Tammy, the Affordable Care Act is the story of the decade. So how does your self-made president deal with the aftermath of a program which by that time, by 2017, will be the entrenched law of the land?
Well, that also goes back to the economic question you asked me. I mean, first of all, my ideal candidate is working or will be working or will have work to make it not be entrenched because it's a cancer. So this is like starting to go to a doctor and you're choosing a doctor. Do you want a doctor who's just going to send you to the hospice? Or do you want a doctor who's already got a plan to get the thing out of the system? Awesome. That's my candidate.
Awesome.
So what we've got is hopefully not entrenched, but it's clearly got to happen in a variety of steps. This is something that has to be ultimately stopped, whether it is repealed on a step-by-step basis, or if it is simply stopped, as we see indications the federal government feels that it can simply postpone things. It needs to be certainly postponed, but we do have a healthcare dynamic in this country that needs to be adjusted. Clearly at this point, and I don't think in 2017 it'll be any different, nobody's been made better off in all seriousness. The American people have had enough. So I think the people who are lining up or the person who might be coming in, who we don't know yet who will be this candidate, understands that part of the role of the new Senate and of the new House and of the campaign is to make sure that this thing does not become so entrenched that it cannot be removed. Now, we also know, of course, that this gigantic ACA change, this gigantic healthcare change, happened and really dismantled a working, functional system that had been in place for a very long time. So even if it is entrenched, there is no reason why we still can't have a plan to remove it, because it's not going to be something, even then, that is going to make the American people's lives better or easier. It will also have an economic impact that is going to be so destructive. We think we feel it now. We have no idea. Every sign will point, and every dynamic of the election will point to a mandate to whoever comes into that office to change that to remove it, and yes, to replace it with something that you can deal with discreetly. As an example, the 15% of the American people that didn't have health insurance, who apparently don't want it because they're not signing up for it now, you can discreetly deal on a singular issue in that discrete fashion with that framework. If we're dealing with people who are getting canceled because they get sick, you can have legislation that addresses that as well. And, you know, the American people want there to be fairness, but I think that the person who's coming in right now and who's thinking about being president had better be thinking about starting to change that and advocating for the change and having a conservative plan that makes up the difference, and that's got to be worked on right now.
Well, Bill, you know, the world has grown increasingly complex, and some would say that at this point, geopolitical strategy is a fool's game, given the dozens of powerful players in the world and the deadly consequences of miscalculation. How does your hand-assembled Lego candidate approach foreign policy?
I think the president should say that the American people and the foreign policy of the United States of America is a reflection of the values of the American people. We believe in free trade, open trade. We're friendly and generous people. We're the most generous people in the world. People say American charity is low as a function of government, but all the private charity in the world essentially comes from America. We're a generous, free people, and we like to trade, and we like to be friends. We have no ambitions for any other territory in the world, and we never have. We live in the best place in the world. What the hell would we possibly want with Somalia or the Saudi sands? And I would simply say this. I would say our foreign policy reflects our attitude towards freedom. So wherever there is a fight for freedom in the world, the United States will be your ally. If there's a civil war where neither side is fighting for freedom, we don't have a dog in that fight, and we should stay out of it. But if there is a freedom-fighting organization, if the Iranian people, for example, rise up against the most dangerous and horrific regime that we have in the world today, I would do something more than was done in 2009. I would back those people with an enormous amount of moral support. Don't underestimate moral support. It was the moral support of Reagan and Thatcher and Pope John Paul II that brought down the Soviet Union. But I would do these things and make it clear that we are on the side of freedom, and that is a consistent value that will never change. But with that said, Scotty, I think the one shorthand answer I would give you is this. If I was the President of the United States and my foreign policy would be dictated on the perception by our enemies that I was not only not afraid to use our military, that on some level I was actually really, really looking forward to it. Ronald Reagan was tarred as a warmonger and a lunatic. He's going to get us all killed. But that attitude reflected the fact that people got the impression that Ronald Reagan believed in this country, believed in its armed forces, and was ready to send them into battle to protect our interests. And because of that, the Iranian hostages were released an hour after he was inaugurated. Because of that, the Soviet Union realized they could not play on the Star Wars battlefield. They just didn't have the money or the technology, and the Soviet Union collapsed. You have to project as the President of the United States an aura of strength and confidence, and I mean this. It has to be subtle because you don't want to be saber-rattling, but a willingness and, in fact, even an eagerness to unleash the forces of freedom in defense of our values come hell or high water. When John Kennedy did that, that was the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and this is proven by history to be the answer. So I would project strength and friendliness and freedom, and I don't see how you can go wrong selling those three things.
Well, of the debating of issues and policies, there is no end. However, there are but a few core principles. When it comes to governance, really just two: individual liberty and equal justice under law. So, on immigration, let them come and let them obey the law. On economics, let them compete and convict them when they cheat. On health care, let the people who hurt and the people who heal the people who hurt decide what gets treated and what it costs. On foreign affairs, defend our national interests forcefully enough to discourage others from encroaching on them. Well, I know, that's simplistic. But I have only a few seconds to speak. And you, my friend, have the entire comment section. For Bill Whittle, Tammy Bruce, and the Trifecta crew at pjtv.com, I'm Scott Ott.